Okay, so since everyone's here, we're going to start today's session. So for people who came to the session last week, you guys will probably know me. But for people who didn't, my name is Sean. I'm here to help you guys become better debaters and make better arguments. So as I explained last time, there's no right way or wrong way of arguing, but I think that there are more persuasive and more stronger ways of arguing when it comes to debate. And what we're trying to do in the CCA is trying to help you guys, trying to introduce you guys to more formal debating. So has anyone in here done WSC before? World Scholars Cup? A show of hands. Or YTN, or like 연세 corner, or any kind of debating competition. Hands up, please. Up high. Okay, so I see it's like kind of half-half. So in debate, there's like many ways of debating, just as like there's many types of sports or many types of like paintings or such. But then in this CCA, the type of debate that we're going to be specifically focusing in is a method called Asian Parliamentary, and this is the debating style that we do in WSC or in competitions like YTN. It's the type of debating where you have the affirmative side, which is basically the positive side, and the negative side, and then you guys just basically agree and disagree upon a given subject. To just really briefly summarize what I talked about in the last session, we're going to have 8 sessions where we have like kind of lecture and I kind of like introduce you to the content and like stylistic elements of debating. So for today, we're going to talk about speaker roles, and then in the next time, we're going to talk about how to interpret topics, how to analyze them, and how to read motions, which is a formal word for topics. And then in the next week, we're going to do a full debate, and then we're going to cover things like argument construction and rebuttals, which is just basically proving why you're right and why the other person is wrong. Okay, so today, because I have to introduce you guys to this totally new format for some people, I'll talk a lot in today's session, but from now on, you guys are going to speak much more than me. And then we're going to run real debates with 6 to 8 people. We have like a large crowd, so we'll probably split it into half and then run one debate over there and the other one in here. And Injun, who is here, say hi to Injun, is going to be like the other person who's going to be judging the debating rounds, the friendly matches that happen in our session. Yes. So let's just briefly talk about speaker roles and run a really short debate for today. Everyone good? So for anyone who has done WSC or YTN or any sort of debating competition before, what do you call 2 teams that engage in a debate? What's the name for them? Yes, that's correct. Sorry for my terrible spelling. And this side is, so there's a topic that will be given at the start of each round, and the affirmative side is the side that proposes, which is just basically prove why this is right, and the negative team is just going to basically prove why this is wrong. We call that the opposition as well. And then you can see in your notes, in the first part, what should each speaker do? We have 2 sides, and on each side there's going to be 3 to 4 speakers. And each of them have distinctive roles. This is to prevent the debate from being really messy, because if each speaker has a role, so for example, if the third speaker is summing up the debate, it's going to be clearer for the audience and the judge as well. So we have different roles for each speakers. First speakers are called constructive speakers because you construct the arguments and the case of your side. So the first speaker is going to present the arguments and like the problem in our society, what you're going to do in order to solve this, because that is how you construct your case, right? And then the second speaker is just basically going to try to disprove. So you're going to mainly do rebuttals, which is trying to disprove your opponent and say why your side is right. The final speaker, the third speaker, is going to do a comparison and a wrap-up Because if you had like 2 speakers, if you had like 4 or 5 speakers before you, that's probably a lot of content, right? So in order for the judge to really understand that well, and in order for the audience to understand that as well, you need to wrap up all the vast content that has came out in the previous 4 to 5 speakers, and then try to compare their side and your side, and say why your side has done a better job. Good? Any questions before we go into more specific content? No? Okay. So in here, I made 3 levels. It says level 1, level 2, and level 3. This is because if I only explain what each speaker should do, like if I only explain the basic rules, people who know this could be bored, right? So level 1, I wrote this for people who are now really new to this type of debating. So for people who haven't done WSC before, for people who haven't really done formal debating before, you can look at level 1. Level 2, this is where you're quite used to debating and you want to improve yourself and want to become better debaters. And then in level 3, this is where you try to put in strategy. So if you have quite a lot of experience with debating, and if you want to know how to become like how to excel in your speaker roles and try to win other teams, then you might want to look at level 3 as well. So while I'm explaining level 1, if you guys are interested in 2 or 3, and if you already know the basic rules, you can just go on and read that first. Okay? So in level 1, these are like the basic roles of each side, each speaker. Propositions for speaker. So because we have constructive speakers, speakers that do rebuttals, and speakers that do the comparison, we would have 6 speakers in total, right? So the first speaker, who is here, would identify the problem. And a formal word for this would be status quo. And this is quite a buzzword. Like if you write this in your IGCSE humanity essays, they would love it, okay? So this is basically where you identify the problem. In every topic, it will try to advocate or try to argue for some kind of change. So like if you're banning zoos, for instance, or if you're banning homework, then there must be a problem for you to advocate for that kind of change. There must be a problem with homework for you to argue that we should ban homework, right? So the first thing to do here is to identify the problem in propositions for speaker. And then in the second one, and then the second rule is definitions. And if you think about this, it's quite intuitive. Because if you're debating about a certain topic, both sides should agree what the topic is actually about. So here you try to define what this motion or this topic actually means. So if it's banning homework, you should define what banning actually looks like, what you mean by ban, and also you should also define what you mean by homework. Is it going to be like school homework or a Hagwon homework as well? Is it going to be like any sort of homework or whatever, right? So this is where you define the topic so that you'll have a more more rebuttals and engagement between both sides. The third part is to propose a solution, because if you have a problem, you will want to go for a solution as well, because you identify the problem, and then in order to solve this, and in order to win the debate, you should probably explain why your side solves this problem. And then the fourth thing to do after doing all these 3 is to present arguments. The number of arguments that you can present is just basically like, it's really up to you. You can do like 40 arguments if you want to, but I think the best number would be around 1 or 2, because if you have like limited speaking time and you want to like really focus on the points that are really important in your case. So I would recommend doing like 2 arguments or maybe 3. And then on the negative side, you speak after this speaker has spoken. So in these kind of debates, after Prop 1 has spoken, Opposition 1 would go. After Opposition 1 has spoken, we would have Proposition 2, and like this. Each side just basically speaks in an alternating way. It's just that Prop goes first. And then on opposition side, you firstly challenge 1 or 2 or 3 that came from proposition. So in opposition, you're saying that this topic is bad. You're saying that this shouldn't happen. So whatever the topic is, let's say that it's like banning homework. Inside opposition, what you do is that you should persuade the judge that we should not ban homework, right? And in order to do that, we might want to say that the problem doesn't exist, or that proposition solution isn't really good enough and is solving just nothing. These are like some strategies that you might take on opposition. So the first thing to do is to challenge either number 1, number 2, or number 3. Say that, just point out the flaws in the foundation of propositions arguments. And then the second one to do is, because they have presented 2 arguments, you rebut their arguments. This is quite straightforward, right? And then after doing this, you would also want to present your 2 arguments to the audience. And again, in opposition, you would want to do like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 arguments on opposition as well, if you're the first speaker. And then, yeah. So this is the roles of the first speaker on each side. Are there any questions before I go on to second speakers? Is everything clear? And then we go to proposition. Because they rebutted your arguments, you want to take them back, right? So we call them retakes. You retake the rebuttals and say that why their rebuttals are basically wrong. The second thing is, because they have presented arguments, you again rebut their 2 arguments. And then the final thing to do is to present your third argument. And then third arguments, these are kind of like overlooked in debates. These are kind of like, most people consider these as like really unimportant, but the impact of third arguments is that they can be kind of used like a game changer, because like people usually focus on the content that came in the first speakers, but if you have like a really strong third argument, your third speaker could use it to your advantage and tell the audience why this is like super important. So that's like the importance of third arguments. So please try to have them. And then an opposition second speaker, at this point, it's kind of like there's kind of like no point in rebutting something that has already been rebutted for 2 times, right? So there's quite no point in rebutting the retakes again. So you will want to rebut this rebuttal to this argument, and then this would be a retake that you do on opposition. So this looks kind of complicated, but in essence what you're doing is that you're retaking your first speaker's arguments and rebutting the other side's first speaker's arguments. So it sounds complicated, but basically it's just retaking your team's arguments and then rebutting. So again, you rebut this third argument here, and then you present your third argument. And then this can be quite confusing. So while you're debating for today, you can just feel free to look at your notes. And then also behind there, I put like an appendix. I think it's like the 4th and 5th page, I guess. There's like an appendix for signposting. Can everyone see it? That's where I kind of like put like a checklist of things that you should focus on if you're the second speaker. And then in the third speech, we're almost done. And then in the third speech, you would do a comparison. Here, what both speakers do is just basically the same. You make 3 clashes. Not 3. It doesn't have to be 3. But the optimal number would be 3. So I'll just put this 3. And clashes are when both sides have arguments, but then they have like an area where they overlap in between. So if proposition is talking about how apples are bad because they are unhealthy And then opposition is saying that apples are good because they're healthy. If these two arguments collide with each other, we would identify this as a clash because both sides are presenting arguments that have the common theme of health. So again, back to the topic about banning homework. If one side talks about how homework is good for students' learning, and the other side talks about how homework causes stress and stress is bad for learning, then these would be a clash because the two arguments have a common theme of learning, right? So this is how you want to identify clashes. The reason why I identify clashes is because if you have arguments that have a common theme, then it's easier for you to tell the audience or the judge why your side did a better job presenting that argument, why your side did a better job winning that theme or that area of focus. So you want to present clashes and compare both sides and tell the judge or the audience why your side has done a better job. For people that already know this, while I briefly go over the other columns, which is level 2 and level 3, if you guys are unfamiliar to this type of debate, you can just go over again and try to read what I've written in the chart in there. So in level 2, what I wrote is, first of all, first speakers should have really cool introductions and nice rhetoric. This is important because because content is important, but how you present an argument is also quite important. And then if you have good illustrations, if you have good examples, or a good depiction of the problem and you present that to the judge, it's much more easier for them to be convinced. So I think one of the most important things for our first speakers to have is a really fancy and good rhetoric. Yes, and then in the first speech, you might want to add strategy because you're quite running out of time. If you're interested, you can just read the notes that I wrote there. But we're going to also cover this in other sessions. So, and then the second speaker, what you will want to focus on is to have early comparisons. So third speakers mostly focus on comparisons, but second speakers is also okay for you to do comparisons as well. The reason why I didn't write comparisons in here is because comparison can be quite confusing and hard at first. But if you're familiar with this kind of debating, you might want to do comparisons in the second speech before the third speakers do it in the very first place. The reason why doing comparisons is quite important at this stage is because comparisons is basically showing why your side is right and their side is wrong at the same time. So it's kind of like 공방일치, okay? And then in the final with speech, what you would also want to focus on is to have new rebuttals and new levels of responses that your previous speakers haven't really explained on. In a whip speech, it's quite important to read the flow of a debate about what points are quite important, which points are the most important clashes, which points are the winning points for our side to win in this debate. These are the kinds of things that whips have to identify. And then there would be many deadlocks until the whip speech. So a deadlock is when both sides present arguments, but you just say, no, that doesn't happen, no, that doesn't happen. And this just basically repeats until the whip speech. And then it's really hard for the judge or the audience to figure out which side did a better job. Then what you want to do as a whip speaker is to provide a totally new response, a new layer of response that is going to break that deadlock and prove why your side has done a better job. So on whip speeches, first identifying the winning points, which is the most important points in the debate for you to win. So back to the topic of banning homework, probably the most winning point or the most important point will be learning, because the ultimate purpose of homework is learning. Or in other debates, it might also be health as well, because if both teams focus on health more than learning, then winning the clash related to health would be more important to win the debate, because that becomes a more important clash at the end. So the first thing to do in brief speeches in level 2 and level 3 is to identify the winning points. And then the second one is to break deadlocks and try to explain why in a case, why in clashes where it's really hard for your audience to figure out who has done a better job, try to explain why your side has done a better job using new examples, new responses, new rebuttals, and so on. If you are first to this type of debating, it's okay for you guys to only do these. You can use the appendix that I put here. It's this appendix signposting script. And yeah, I think that's it for the content. Are there any questions or any clarifications you guys want to make? Is everything really clear?